Within the Soul Society, there's been a character among the Shinigami that's argued to be the strongest, the leader of Squad Zero, Ichibei Hyosube. We don't truly know how long he's been around, likely millions of years, but he's someone who quite literally gave the sword, spells, and practically everything in the Bleachverse their name. I thought it would be an interesting video to discuss how he would fare against the strongest ninja in Naruto, the Hokage. The main run of Bleach and Naruto Shippuden have been done for quite some time, but it goes without saying that there will be spoilers in this video, so if you haven't read Bleach or Naruto in their entirety, I suggest you click off now. Like any crossover battle between series, we're laying out the foundation that ninjas are able to see, interact, and be susceptible to spiritual pressure-based attacks and vice versa. Otherwise, if this wasn't the case, there would be absolutely no point in making this video or these characters even fighting for that matter. So with that quick introduction out of the way, how would the monk who names all things stack up against the leaders of Konoha? Just to get an idea of who Ichibei is as well as his scaling, let's go into the role he has in the story to determine just how powerful of a character he really is. For one, Ichibei is hands down the oldest Shinigami in the entire series, with him predating even the likes of Captain Commander Yamamoto, who's at least 2,000 years old. He's the leader of Squad Zero, a special task force that resides in a realm outside of the Gauntlet 13, whose one and only job is to protect the Soul King. The one entity who's responsible for balancing the Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the human world. In addition to naming the swords in the series Zanpakuto, he also named the release forms of these swords being Shikai and Bankai. And apart from this enormous amount of experience, Ichibei brings a tremendous amount of hacks to this fight, which I think is something that's incredibly difficult for any fictional character to go up against. As you guys may probably already know, this comes from his brush Ichimonji, as well as some ancient Hado abilities and other shenanigans like that. Ichimonji is without a doubt one of the most broken Zanpakuto in the entire Bleach series, with it having the ability to modify, weaken, and give new properties to things with the ink that is produced from it. In its sealed form, Ichimonji takes the appearance of a large calligraphy brush, which Ichibei uses to write various characters. His Shikai command, blacken or paint it black depending on the translation, transforms the brush into somewhat of a short glaive, with the top portion taking the form of a single-edged sword. In his Shikai's form, when Ichibei swings his blade at the opponent as opposed to cutting them like a traditional sword, he covers them instead with black ink. And anything that the ink covers can be severely weakened, like we see in Ichibei's fight with Yuha, where the ink gets on his arm and he tells him now that his arm is now referred to as R, essentially cutting that power in half. Being able to control names, especially in a world like Bleach, is incredibly overpowered given the story's emphasis on names and where power is derived from. And that's only the abilities Ichibei has access to in his Shikai form. Ichibei's second release, Shirafude Ichimonji, allows him to give and change the name of targets who had been struck by the ink of Ichimonji in its Shikai form by writing kanji on that entity. When he does this, he gives the property of that specific name to whatever he wrote the kanji on, like we see in his fight against Yuha. For example, by changing their name to something like Black Ant, the opponent would be as weak and as powerless as a tiny little insect. This is by far his biggest asset when it comes to versus battles, given that if he can land ink on his opponent, he can completely power neg practically any character. The only reason that Yuha was able to counter this ability was because of his innate technique, the Almighty, which allows him to replenish power that he loses, basically making him immune to Ichibei's ink. And as we know from the Hokage in Naruto, none of the characters possess any sort of Almighty type ability that would allow them to outright negate this, and therefore that's why hacks is going to be incredibly important when it comes to the outcome of every battle. Apart from his broken Zanpakuto abilities, Ichibei embodies everything as black in the Bleachverse and therefore can use it against his opponents in battle. I think this is incredibly important to mention because Ichibei has the ability to produce a monstrous amount of ink at once, and his hacks isn't only limited to small concentrated areas. Apart from this, his Senri Sutencho, being a giant hand that he can just pull out of nowhere, had the ability to send Yuha flying over 1,000 ri away, which has been stated to be approximately 3,927 kilometers or 2,440 miles. With these hands, Ichibei was able to crush and destroy Yuha's light beams even after he had restored back the power he lost with the Almighty. Not to mention, Ichibei has access to ancient Kido, which is implied to be on a level far beyond that of the Gauntlet 13. These Kido include incantations such as Teppusatsu, which had the ability to completely shatter the dome that was created by Yuha's Blue Vein. likely one of the strongest defenses in the Quincy arsenal. And if none of that were to work, then Ichibei could launch his ultimate trump card, the Futen Taisatsu Ryo, which literally takes all of the darkness from an opponent and absolutely obliterates them until they're reduced to nothing. Now that we got the solo fighters' feats out of the way, let's jump into each of Ichibei's battles against the strongest ninja in the Leaf Village, the Hokage. Of all 8 leaders in the Hidden Leaf Village, there are 2 that are typically regarded as the weakest depending on how you look at them, with those being the provisional 8th Hokage Shikamaru and 5th Hokage Tsunade. And the thing with Shikamaru is we don't really have a ton of information on what he's able to do as a Hokage. Sure, he's an incredible genius, but he pales in comparison from a power perspective when compared to literally every single one of his peers. We know he's able to outright dodge attacks from someone like Delta, who scales relative to some of the higher tiers in the verse, and therefore this feat alone places Shikamaru's speed in that same realm. However, I'm just not convinced that Shikamaru's Shadow Possession Jutsu would have any effect against someone like Ichibei. In the data books, it was mentioned that Shikamaru actually struggled to snap a tree in half, which seems kind of absurd to me, but his binding power is known to stop Kage level fighters. So if you wanted to massively hype up Shikamaru here, the best he could probably do is stop Ichibei in his tracks, but literally be unable to do any sort of significant damage to him. There would be a deadlock until Shikamaru ran out of chakra, and Ichibei would honestly just one-tap him with his palms, and that would be the end of it. To be honest here, I could see Ichibei literally stealing the black from his Shadow Possession Jutsu and using it against him to completely negate that option for him altogether. Absolutely no hate on my boy Shikamaru, but he's going down really easily in this matchup, so I don't think there's much to say here. Next, moving on to the 5th Hokage, Tsunade. Tsunade's feats primarily just come from her physicality, attack power, and her ability to rapidly heal herself and others. She's also been shown to have respectable strength feats, as her striking power has been compared to the level of Tailed Beasts, and even Naruto in his version 2 Tailed Beast form that we saw go up against Orochimaru. And perhaps if she sustained a large amount of physical damage during the fight, she could potentially be able to prolong it with her 100 Healings Jutsu, which would provide her some added utility that Shikamaru didn't have. Moving into her speed and reflexes, I think they're commendable, with her being able to generally hold her own in the fight against Madara, but she's still clearly below the speedsters in her verse, placing her massively below the speed scaling of someone on Ichibei's caliber. Madara even states this himself when he says that she's slower than the Raikage, but her power is much greater. Bleach's speed scaling is a little contentious, but Ichibei's speed can obviously be compared to the level of Yuha Bak, the same character who Pre-Almighty is considered relative to Captain Commander Yamamoto. This is a little contentious because we saw Yuha get absolutely clapped by Yama's Bankai, since this is actually Royd Lloyd using his Shrift as opposed to the actual Yuha. But I think we can all confidently say that the real Yuha is pretty comfortably on this level of power. The main thing this matchup boils down to is just that he has the superior hacks and skills way above her when it comes to speed, strength, durability, and basically every metric you can think of. So Tsunade is probably going to get blitzed and 1 or 2 shot depending on if she uses any healing techniques, probably without Ichibei having to use any Ichimonji abilities. Up next we have Tobirama, the genius Hokage that created the Flying Raijin, Shadow Clone Jutsu, and Reaper Death Seal. Now he's a really interesting character because people either hate on this man or praise him, saying he's like the best thing ever. Clearly he's one of the smartest characters in all of Naruto, essentially being the pioneer for most potent jutsu in the series and founding the ninja system of the Hidden Leaf Village. Now, the interaction between Ichibei and Tobirama is really interesting, and this is something that I'm going to get into when we talk about Minato too, and that's regarding the Flying Raijin and whether his speed would be able to outpace the likes of somebody like Ichibei. A feat that I think commonly gets misconstrued about Tobirama is his ability to tag someone on the level of Jubito with a Flying Thunder God seal, which I think is a little disingenuous. When reading through the fight, it's clear to me that he gets attacked and then places the seal on him out of reaction, as opposed to blitzing him, closing the distance, and then placing the seal on Jubito. These would be 2 very different interpretations. Sure, I think it's still impressive because it shows a high amount of reaction speed in this instance, but it's clear to me that he doesn't scale near the top of the verse when it comes to his travel speed. Now, I hate to do this to my boy Tobirama, but I don't see him standing a chance against Ichibei, and I'll tell you exactly why. Regardless of how fast Ichibei literally is, let's say the Flying Raijin is instantaneous teleportation and he's able to blitz and cut Ichibei Ichibei's head off. We know that this wouldn't necessarily give him the win in this fight because anyone could speak Ichibei's name and then he could essentially reform his body and resurrect himself. And that's really the most that I could see Tobirama being able to do to Ichibei. I don't really think paper bombs are really going to cut it when it comes to someone like this Shinigami. Other than that, I think Ichibei's attack potency scales convincingly higher to the point where it would only take a couple of palm strikes or an advanced Hado to really put down the second Hokage. Therefore, while Tobirama has a lot of impressive things at his disposal in the ninja world, they're not enough to take down this completely overpowered monk. Now, I know I didn't talk about the Reaper Death Seal in this matchup, but I wanted to get into that when we talk about our next matchup, which is the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. Hiruzen, being said to have mastered every single technique in the Leaf Village, will be able to come at Ichibei with the most versatility, I think, out of any of the Hokage. As we saw in his fight against Orochimaru, he's a master of all 5 basic nature elements being water, earth, fire, wind, and lightning style. Keep in mind too, while Hiruzen isn't really the most imposing Hokage or someone who stands out all that much, we have to remember he was a character who was able to survive into old age during the Second Great Ninja War, an event that brought rise to characters like Nagato and Sasori as well as the 3 Sannin. He can summon Monkey King Enma and wield an adamantine staff, making it expand and contract like the Naruto version of Sun Wukong. On top of this, he was able to go against 2 stronger Hokage being the Senju brothers, Hashirama and Tobirama. And although the Edo Tensei version of these Hokage are factually weaker with their techniques but stronger in regards to their chakra and endurance, I think it's logical to say that they're on a relative level to their alive forms. But despite all of these pretty tremendous accolades, I really struggle to find anything within the third Hokage's arsenal that would be enough to outscale Ichibei or avoid the ink of his Ichimonji. I mean, one of his strongest attacks, the Reaper Death Seal, is him summoning a literal Shinigami, which I find hilarious because Ichibei literally is the father of all Shinigami, and it would be very reasonable that he could probably negate the effects of the jutsu entirely. And given that this fight couldn't be won with any sort of hacks from Hiruzen's part, I don't think it's a giant leap to conclude that Ichibei scales massively higher in speed, durability, and attack potency. So I feel like the outcome of this fight would be pretty obvious. Ichibei would simply rename Hiruzen to some insignificant creature with his ink and crush him almost instantaneously. Next up, we have the Yellow Flash himself, Minato Namikaze. And this matchup is interesting because this would essentially come down to a cat and mouse game between the two, where if Minato is tagged a single time by Ichimonji, it's practically game over. Now, the question is whether the Flying Raijin is fast enough to outpace and outlast a character like Ichibei. And as we kinda got into with Tobirama, the hard thing with scaling Bleach characters definitely comes from their speed feats. However, if we want to bring up Ichibei's 1000 Ri feat, where he moves that distance instantaneously and catches up to Yuha, this would be clocking him in at thousands of times the speed of sound, which I think severely lowballs him. A speed feat that's commonly brought up by the Naruto fanbase is the moment where Minato teleports in front of 8 Gates Guy and teleports away before he punches Madara's truth-seeking orb shield. 8 Gates Guy is someone who, with his final attack, the Night Guy, can land a hit on someone like Ten Tails Madara, a character who is pretty soundly, in all intents and purposes, being faster than light. So let's say, for the sake of this argument, that Minato and the Flying Raijin are faster than Ichibei. Let's just see how things would pan out if he was able to tag him. An interesting win con for Minato could be the fact that he might be able to grab Ichibei's stomach and seal him just like he was able to seal literally half the Nine Tails inside of himself. However, if we wanted to scale Ichibei's speed more realistically, we could compare him to somebody like End of Series Ichigo and Yuha, who are definitely within the realm of light speed. I don't see any universe where you can compare these characters to the speed of sound alone. Therefore, the battle between Minato and Ichibei would all be contingent on whether he'd be able to touch him, and I want to give the speed advantage to Ichibei here, but it's really ambiguous. Given that I think Minato's output wouldn't be enough to take down Ichibei, and he really hasn't shown too many large durability feats that we can hang our hat on, I think if Ichibei was tagged with an attack, he would simply just tank the damage and take out Minato with a moderate, if not easy, amount of difficulty. Next up, we have the first Hokage, the god of shinobi, Hashirama Senju. This guy is so busted in his verse that characters like Orochimaru are constantly trying to steal even a sliver of his cells. It's like the famous Naruto meme where his cells are considered greater than plot armor for everything and a justification for Kishimoto to pull off some insane narratives, especially when we get to the later parts of the story. His wood style style alone is absolutely crazy, allowing him to create massive forests and trees with no issues whatsoever. Not to mention the stamina and ability to fight for 24 hours straight with no rest against a Madara who is controlling the Nine Tails clad in Susanoo armor. When he enters Sage mode, he can summon a giant Buddha that is colossal in size compared to the Nine Tails itself. So much so that it's literally picking it up like it's a toy he's playing with. This is a character who captured every single tailed beast and gave them away to each village like he was donating to different charities. He did this as not to disturb the balance of power that existed between villages so that the leaf wouldn't be a force of nature compared to every other village. Keep in mind that these tailed beasts were stated to be able to turn the world to ash. Whether you take this as hyperbole or not, the strength of these monsters can't be denied. But despite these astronomical feats, I think Ichibei takes this battle for the following reasons. We haven't seen too many speed feats from Hashirama, but I don't see any reliable evidence why he would be able to outpace Ichibei, given the speed feats that we've already established for him. We know that he's near levels of characters like EMS Madara, but gets blitzed when it comes to someone like Ten Tails Obito. Now, it's important to mention that this was actually a wood clone and not the real Hashirama, but it's logical to say that they are most likely relative in speed to one another. And we've already established that people on Ten Tails' level of speed might be able to catch up to Ichibei, but there's very little he could do to get around his cracked abilities and high durability scaling. The one thing I will give Hashirama is if he's somehow able to pull off using the deity gates on Ichibei, which are said to completely suppress your will to fight, that might potentially stop him from being hostile. But who's to say that Ichibei wouldn't simply cover them in ink, rename them to something harmless, and toss them off him? And the same could be said for Hashirama's wood jutsu as well. And trust me guys, I love Hashirama more than the next person. He's a ridiculously powerful character, just not when you put him up against somebody with the reality warping god powers of Ichibei. Second to last would be the 6th Hokage, Kakashi Hatake. An interesting thing to point out about Kakashi that we can't really say for sure is how his Sharingan and illusionary tactics would translate in the world of Bleach. We know from all of Kakashi's fights that he doesn't specialize in any of the genjutsu related aspects of the Sharingan and instead focuses on overpowering his opponents with his Mangekyo and Kamui. While this is kind of headcanon-y, a question that's interesting to ask is whether or not Kakashi would be able to copy Ichibei's Shikai and Bankai abilities with his Sharingan. If you were to ask me though, I would say no, because a Shinigami's abilities are linked to their soul itself, and we know that Sharingan can't copy bloodline techniques like Kekkei Genkai, so we know it has limitations on innate techniques to certain individuals. However, if we're talking about somebody like War Arc Kakashi instead, the conversation actually gets pretty interesting. At his peak in the war, Kakashi was able to tag and keep up with someone like Obito Uchiha with the Rinnegan, a character who scales directly with somebody like KCM1 Naruto, who was clearly established to be above people like the 3rd Raikage when it comes to speed. Therefore, from this comparison, I think it's fairly logical to deduce that Kakashi is above light speed, not just lightning speed like some people believe him to be. But despite this, I don't think Kakashi has the attack potency to be able to severely harm Ichibei enough to the point of taking him out with his physical attacks alone. That's why I think he would need to use Kamui to send Ichibei into a separate pocket dimension and essentially trap him there, and that would be his win condition. The Kamui we see at the end of Shippuden is insanely strong, with it being able to snipe off portions of the Ten Tails. We know that those in the Naruto-verse who possess space-time ninjutsu are able to properly dodge Kamui like we see with Minato, so if you're sufficiently fast, you can essentially bypass getting caught in this technique, which, as we've clearly stated, it's contentious to say whether Ichibei is or not. Ichibei could try to splash some ink on Kakashi to nerf him, but with his intangibility granted by his DMS, I struggle to find a way Ichibei would be able to connect those attacks. So for the sake of this argument, if we're assuming that Ichibei's ink is a physical attack and doesn't affect the soul or spirit directly, then I find it difficult to see how Ichibei gets around Kakashi's hacks here. Therefore, under the right conditions, I firmly believe that somebody like DMS Kakashi would be the first Hokage to take a W in this gauntlet. Moving on to the final challenge, we have undoubtedly the strongest Hokage in the entire series, our main character Naruto. And let's be real, by the end of the series, Naruto is for all intents and purposes cracked. He has access to 6th Path Sage mode, which allows him to use nature energy to the highest degree, detect beings within another plane of existence, and have access to every single nature transformation in the verse. He has the ability to heal any sort of injury with a simple touch. Point blank, he's basically the ninja world's form of Jesus. And this battle could very well be its own fleshed out video, but it's truly hard to say who would come out on top in this matchup. I think depending on who makes the first move, the fight could go either way. But in looking at the scaling of each character, I think there's a pretty solid foundation that Ichibei would take the W here under the right conditions, especially when you consider him not having any sort of direct counter to Ichibei's ink in the form of intangibility. I know I may be triggering a lot of Naruto fans, but as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, the matchups are going to be largely based around hacks and whether or not Ichibei's ink will be an issue for that given character. Without getting too much in the weeds of scaling, I do concede though that Naruto is generally compared to end of series Ichigo after the end of his Shippuden run. This is an Ichigo who was able to blitz and tag Yuha when he absorbed the essence of the Soul King. So essentially the strongest being that we have ever seen in the series. Now imagine if you had Naruto creating shadow clones who were stated to be comparable in strength to the original, and I think Ichibei could honestly be in some massive trouble here. However, like I alluded to earlier, if Ichibei is able to make the first move and tag Naruto with his ink, he would be able to quickly use his hacks to end the fight immediately. If not though, he would be completely washed by Naruto, no questions asked. Do you guys agree with my verdict? Let me know all your thoughts below. The nature of power scaling across different universes can always be a bit fuzzy, but it's all part of the enjoyment and discussion of it. This video took an enormous amount of effort and time to make, so if you enjoyed, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss when a new video is posted. Until then, stay curious, anime fam. Peace.